Alright, okay, good evening everyone. Hey, welcome to today's session. So let's run through some of the charts over here, the market outlook as well as highlighting opportunities available. Okay, and we'll also see if you guys have any questions, anything that perhaps I may have missed out. Okay, do feel free to let me know, and then we'll be able to take a look at those as well. Okay. So very quickly, let's do a quick recap from last week. Okay, so last week was, I would say, from an event perspective, pretty eventful because from the U.S. side, we do have the presidential election, and of course, we have the FOMC plus, the CPI coming out, all building up from the previous 2 weeks, right? And of course, with that, we also see the dollar actually strengthening quite a bit. Okay, and this is something we'll talk about as we jump into the charts later on as well in terms of the outlook going forward for the dollar. Okay, of course, as well as the equities in general. Okay, so last week CPI for the US came out actually a little bit higher than the previous month, right? It was in line with expectation, but previous month was 2.4. Last week data came out was 2.6. So that kind of like put the whole inflation aspect a little bit to the upside. But if you actually look at the dot plot, general market consensus is still expecting the Fed to cut rates in the next cycle, right? So that's something to know. But of course, we do see that the dollar has actually strengthened quite a bit, right, from this particular data there as well. Okay. And of course, Trump winning the election would also give some positive, I would say, short-term aspect in the U.S. economy and overall. Uh, Generally, his policy tends to be pro-businesses, right, and that actually put some positive sentiment on the U.S. equities as well as market going forward. Right. Now, coming into this week here, we do have a couple of important data, not so dollar heavy. But later at 9:30, we do have the Canadian CPI data. So far over here, the expectation, of course, is pretty much aligned with the previous month data. Uh, Unlikely we're gonna see some major surprises, right? From here. So do take note of that. Tomorrow afternoon, we do have the CPI data as well on year, coming from the UK side. Okay. So that's something to note. If you're looking at the pound side of things, which we will have a particular pair on the pound yen, that I think is worth noting, right? Pound dollar not so crucial. I don't think it's something that's ready, but pound yen can be quite interesting moving forward, right? So that's in relation to the pound CPI. And then Friday here to end off the week, we do have a couple of PMIs from the euro as well as the pound, and then we have the Canadian retail sales as well. Okay. So current expectation again, core retail sales is expecting to be improved quite a bit from the previous month, right? Previous month data was negative. And then retail sales here is basically in line with like previous month. Okay, so again, whenever we look at news and we kind of look at volatility in the market, it's always the surprise element compare relative to what the market has expected. Okay, so that's generally what we have for the week itself. Okay. So let's jump into the charts over here and talk a little bit about the dollar index first. Okay. So right now we have the U.S. election out, right? I mean the result is out, but officially Trump hasn't taken office yet. Okay. And for those of you who understand seasonality, or what we call the 4-year presidential half like election cycle, um, in the US, it does has an impact in the financial markets, right? In particularly if you're looking at individual stocks or equities in general as an index. There's this seasonality study on election cycle, right? Where you have the pre-election year, you have the election year, then you have the year where the new president takes up, and then post-election and things like that. So it's a 4-year cycle, and basically there's a statistical study on that in terms of like which year would certain instrument tend to perform better, and then which year during that 4-year cycle of a presidential election certain assets would tend to perform a little bit worse. Right. So I'm not going to jump into that, but of course, just letting you guys know there's such a study if you're interested in it. Okay, and of course, when we look at the dollar, in particularly DXY itself, there is also some study on that, right? Where historically, the previous time, when Trump actually win the election, we did see during the end of the year, going into the new year, the dollar actually made a significant drop, right? So then that opens up the topic, or the thought process in terms of will we also see that drop this cycle, okay? And we're talking about going into end of the year and then going into next year. That's where that period of window is, right? So if you couple that with the charts, the technical analysis over here, okay, it's something that may be aligned to, right? Because from a technical point of view right now, what we're seeing is from this low, we have a push up, a little bit of a pullback, and then right now I'm looking at this as a potential 5-wave cycle, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, to complete, the ABC structure, right? And when that completes, potentially opens up the possibility of a bigger pullback to the downside, or even potentially a reversal. Okay, so that is where the technical patterns may actually come in alignment with what I've just mentioned about the election cycle. Right? So of course that doesn't mean that we're just gonna be like looking at that by itself and just be like too focused in having that viewpoint fixated. But that's something to think about, right? Because if the idea of this is we truly get a 5-wave structure and we kind of able to get some sort of a sell setup here, right, near to the top, that might open up the first quarter trading opportunity on the dollar. Okay, and of course, when the dollar drops, not 100% of the time, but there's some correlation with other instruments and assets, right? Like major pairs. When you're talking about commodities, it has an impact onto that as well. And then, of course, we are talking about equities in the US. The dollar would also have a correlation with that. Okay, so that's something to note moving forward in terms of like the dollar index, right? But at least for the short term, I think within the week itself, the focus is potentially still a 5th wave up, right? And of course, in terms of Fibonacci expectation for wave theory over here, wave 4 oftentimes would just be seeing some support around the 38.2. So that will put us around 106, right? Kind of like we came quite close. From price action perspective, you also see this coming down very, very corrective, which is ideal as a continuation to the upside, right? So I think short term, within the week, we're still going to be maintaining a bullish bias, and if the market correctively come back towards the 106 area, that would open up a opportunity to get involved in the long. Right, and then of course if you kind of like map that perspective onto the euro dollar, very, very close relationship with the dollar index, kind of inverse to that, we're then here expecting a little bit more downside, right? But this downside here, if you kind of map the 100% extension, right, from this high to this W to X and then projecting Y, 100% expectation is not far off from where the market price is. Right. So again, this may not be like a very clear sell opportunity, but from a risk to reward ratio perspective, right, I think GBP USD may present a nicer opportunity if you're looking to sell the major pass. But this one here might just play out as a potential kind of a 5-wave structure that looks something like that, right? So short term, yeah, I think the direction bias is still bearish, okay. But from a risk reward picture perspective, we may see some support or some bounce off reaction around that 1.048580 kind of zone, okay. So bear in mind as we are looking at the euro, okay. So that's my take on that. Pound dollar is, I think, a little bit more interesting because you can see if we just use that Fibonacci expectations of equal leg, right, from this high to W to X and then map it here. And of course, internally, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This has more room in which the price can actually develop before hitting that 100%. Okay. So of course, if just based on that kind of comparison between the euro and the pound, then the pound dollar seems to present a much better opportunity in terms of the overall setup. Okay. So again, this pullback here, if we can get a corrective move, then ideally we're gonna see that opportunity, right? I kind of mentioned that just now. Tomorrow we do have the CPI coming in on the UK side, right? Okay, so will that give us that build up from CPI? Okay, we really need to still take a look. Okay, but yeah, generally that's the view on. Yeah, generally that's the view on pound dollar, right? So that's what I want to say. Right, so keep an eye on the area around the 38.2, 1.2750. Okay, we might see some reaction from there. If it's going to be corrective in nature, then solid, right? That might present as a wait for opportunity. Okay, Aussie dollar here has slightly different view from kind of like the rest. Though I'm still actually neutral because we did get some stall around the zone, and then the market gave us a little bit of a push. Not really a very strongly convicted one. But the view on this is simply as a 78.6 key zone from this entire swing, right? Now, can the market come down and retest this bottom as a double bottom kind of structure? I think there is a possibility. Okay, so the idea of this here is really, as I mentioned here, right? We really want to see how the price is gonna respect that 786 area. Okay, because if this continue to bounce higher impulsively, potentially able to take out some of this structure area. Okay, that means close above it with momentum and then starts to pull back. That may signify a potential pullback or even a reversal. Okay, so that's what I'm looking out for. But we'll need, we need price to really give us that confirmation, because as of now, I think it's just a little bit too tiny to make that decision as to whether price has, really started that move to the upside. Okay, so that for that very reason, I'm just gonna maintain neutral on the Aussie dollar for now. Okay, then we have the dollar Canadian. So dollar Canadian has been, very, very aggressively moving up. Forming a couple of like crawlish pattern over here. This crawl actually did make quite a big of a pullback. But from a bigger picture perspective, we didn't really get a significant pullback, right? And that is also partially because of the dollar, right? If you take a look at the dollar index, this pullback is pretty shallow, right? Again, we were, typically expecting an impulsive move. We expect a more significant pullback if the market resume itself. But because the dollar in general is pretty strong during this period of time, and this pullback is shallow, you then also see this pullback here pretty shallow. Right. So as of now, the current kind of like forecast here is we are looking at again an internal five-wave structure after a bigger, I would say a previous five-wave structure is complete as an A. Okay. So the whole idea of this is that right now the market is testing the 38.2. Yes, from an zoom in perspective, we do get an impulsive drop. But will this be just, a pullback to complete wave 4? Or is this gonna be the peak and we start to see a meaningful pullback from there, right? I think it's a little bit too early to conclude just because of that one candle. Okay. At the end of the day, I think we want to give it a bit more time and see how price is going to respect the 38.2, right? Because if this comes down more, okay, let's just say 1, 2, 3, and it's able to take out some of this area and of course, come into the territory of wave 1 is, then we can start to be more confident and say that this is the top, and a corrective pullback here, we can start to expect a deeper one to the downside, right? So right now, with that as an alternative, right now the primary focus here is more to the upside as a simple 1, 2, 3, 4, and then if that's gonna respect, then we can expect fifth wave out, right? Okay. Yeah, so that's on the dollar Canadian as of now. Okay. Then we have the dollar yen. Okay. Dollar yen is actually quite similar in a way towards how I'm seeing the dollar Canadian. Just a little bit more, a little bit more sign on the downside as of now. Price actually managed to take out this zone. All right. But I'm still neutral because ideally I want to see some significant move coming back here, and then a corrective pullback would be more confident in saying that all right, the trend previously on the upside has started to kind of like change, right? Even if this is a three-wave correction. Yeah, so I think the key focus for me on dollar yen is really to see how price can actually take out or tag that area impulsively and then give us a corrective pullback. Um, then that would be more ideal, right? But right now, the expectation here is this fifth wave can be completed, and then we're kind of expecting a three-wave move back towards the 50% mark. Okay. Yeah, so that's on the dollar yen perspective. Do we have like a really ideal sell setup at the moment? Not yet, I would say. Okay. But that's again, because of the dollar index, right? The major pairs are just not going to be like clear, simply because the dollar index itself is, still really very much uncertain. Okay, then we have gold. I think gold here is pretty clear in terms of like what is the structured development, right? This one here we are kind of like, if we can of course get a three-way pullback, that would be ideal. Okay. So this structure, if you zoom out a little bit, is quite clear. Previously it's an out move, right? And the recent times over here, we have seen a pretty impulsive drop. Price able to take out this with momentum. You can see that. Okay, and internally here we are seeing it as a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then of course internal here is also 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to give us that wave 3. Right. So what can build into this is that this can be our A wave, and then of course wave B seems to be developing right now, and then after which we can expect one more push. Okay. But in the near term, if we can get a corrective pullback here, I think this would be a pretty decent opportunity to trade it. Okay. So we have this as an impulsive move. Then of course, if we get a corrective pullback, we can expect one more push, potentially towards the 50 and 618, right? So I'm just looking at a 50 right now, around 2660. Okay. But I don't think this is gonna be a setup that we can go in within the week, because right now the price is impulsive. For it to develop into a correction, it takes time. So based on that time projection, the earliest possible kind of like setup that we may actually look at trade it will very much likely be somewhere next week. Okay. So that's on gold, and of course silver is very very much the same, right? Yeah, so basically that's the look on it as well, right? Corrective pullback, and then we'll look for one more push back up. Okay, so they're basically more or less same pattern structure. Then we have crude oil. Crude oil over here, I am basically neutral. Okay, we do have the market in range environment right now. A couple of lows being tested, the tops being tested. Can we look to trade this back up here? Yes, but it's not something I would want to be really focusing on. I think I would love to just let price, get out of that consolidation phase with clear momentum. Either it starts to go out and break this high, and then starts to form a correction. Then can look at this as, all right, this bottom formation is done. That took out the high, a correction, and we start to look for upside. Or this basically just continued coming down, and then from here we can't get a V-shaped bounce, right? To clear out this structure development here, because at this moment it's just basically not clear within this structure, right? Like where what price wants to go, what's exactly happening, it's just not clear. Okay. Our S&P 500, overall I'm going to be bullish on the equities, right? That's something that I'm pretty confident in going into next year. But of course, short term here, the question is this a 5-wave pullback, right? Because if this is going to be a 5-wave development of a pullback, then that opens up as an A wave, and with that we can assume potentially one more move down. Okay, maybe to retest that low. Okay, to potentially retest like this area here, right? Yeah. Okay. So overall, it's still bullish. But of course, with today and maybe tomorrow development, if this is gonna be an internal 5 and then a correction develop, then we can expect one more push, right? So that will be your A, B, C. Okay. So I think right now probably not the best time to be engaging in a buy trade, though we are overall bullish. Though we do have some sort of a structure support here. I mean, we might, because of that structure support, see some bounce, right? And also that will be in confluence with a 5-way structure and then a pullback reaction. Very, very possible, right? So as of now, I think it's just something that is not like the clearest that we can really trade into, right? Yeah, so that's my take on the S&P, right? Directional bias is bullish. I don't think, you want to be really selling into the equities. But more of like seeing every move to the downside as a potential buy, and if you're trading it, then just wait for a setup. Okay, from a risk reward perspective to get involved. Okay. Yeah. So pound yen is something that may be a little bit more interesting for the yen side of things, right? Because I mean, initially the projection here is a 3-wave and then it start to move up. But it starts to paint a picture where I think this can start to make a move lower. Okay, it can start to make a move lower. Simply from the confluence where this is a channel structure, the market is coming from the top. And this can be 1, 2, and then this is building as a 3, 4, 5, it doesn't need to be in 5-way structure. It can be a 1, 2, 3, pull back, and then 1, 2, 3. Basically, the focus now is on the downside itself. Okay. So yeah, we don't have a setup now, right? But the setup might start to build in because right now with this little move here, if you can see a corrective pullback, that will be a decent sell. Okay, corrective pullback. So this corrective pullback here, if you pull back where the pound dollar is, okay, we might see that bounce there. Okay, so yeah, that's the take on pound yen, right? So if that's gonna be the case, then naturally it's gonna be sell opportunity. If you extend this trend line here, that will be your first primary target that you can look up for. Okay. Then we have the odd yen. So odd yen here, you can see I'm actually interested to be looking at the sell side already. If I go down to the lower time frame here, okay, we can even start to project, a 1-hour kind of channel structure. Okay, kind of like an equal leg projection. Right. Of course, that would then build in very, very nicely with where the 618 is, around that zone, right? Okay, 618 and 1, 2, 3, 50 and then 100 is essentially around that zone. Okay, so if you're looking at this here, you can use the 1618 as a potential stop as well. Okay, so if you take the 1, 2, 3 as an entry point, that will put you around like 55 pips. And then you just target where the previous low is. The risk reward is pretty significant, right? Okay, so that's something I'm going to be readjusting, right? Instead of using that, using the 618 retracement, right? Since this is building up as a potential 3-wave structure, that will be something that I'll be looking into. Okay, if today you don't want to take it at a 1, 2, 3, you can take it at a 100%. Still a very solid risk reward ratio overall, right? Yeah, so that's definitely a opportunity to keep watch on the Aussie yen, right? So that's where I'm actually flagging this. Okay. Then we have the pound odd. Doesn't look very ideal right now. But we have a very, very tight stop, right? To be honest on that. The initial trade idea on this is simply a 1 2 3, the impulsive move here, 1 2 3. We expect this push up, then whether it comes down or not, ideally we would have gotten out of that, right? So right now this trade, the price action doesn't look very ideal. Okay, I'm using a very small stop loss here because I'm using the reference from that low. But if today, of course, you kind of use that 1618, it'll be a little bit safer because the market can also do a little bit of bounce here and then start going up. Okay, and this might even form into maybe an expanding flat or whatever. Yeah. Okay. So it's a very tight stop, and that's where you can see the risk reward is like 1:4. But today, if you actually put your stop here, the risk reward is still okay, right? It's still 2.1. It's 1:2. Okay. So it's really a preference for personal choice, right? In terms of like where you want to put your stop. Okay. But ideally, of course, we want to see the market starts to make a V-shaped reaction to the upside, right? That would be ideal as a three wave, and then from there, this might present a sell opportunity. Okay. Yeah, so that's on the Pound Australia side of things. Just to keep you guys updated on it. Okay. Lastly, here is the Bitcoin. Okay. BTC side of things, of course. Recently, crypto market has been making a strong move. This of course also add on to BTC over here, and that impulse leg is very obvious. Okay. So any sort of a correction obviously will open up a buy trade opportunity to the upside, and all you have to do is just wait for the setup to come to you, and then start to look for upside, right? I think this whole cycle took some time, right? Because as you remember, like earlier the year, we had that halving event, okay, and then statistically again, every time Bitcoin did a halving, technically within the next 6 months to a year, it tends to double its value. We haven't really doubled it, okay, to be frank. But again, based on the context perspective, from 60,000, if you want to double, it's 120,000 of it. Right now, we are doing somewhere around 92,000. It's really not far off, okay. But yeah, it's definitely a bullish one, okay. It's breaking, all-time highs, it's going up and things like that. There's really no reason to be selling it, and the idea on this is just focus on buying it. Okay. Is it something worth investing into? No. But it's just basically speculating trading, right? Yeah, that's the take on BTC as of now. Alright. Yeah, so those are some of the views that I have so far. Okay. Good. I hope that's clear. Quick one on some of the global indices. So we have covered on the S&P 500. Okay. I think the NASDAQ overall here would more or less, okay, I think like NASDAQ seems to be a little bit sending the picture where we are seeing a pretty clear pullback phase. Yeah, I think NASDAQ here, there's a good possibility we'll see a little bit more of a deeper pullback, as this is a top. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I think because of that, maybe the S&P 500 will potentially do like what we mentioned, a 5-3-5, right? Kind of like a bigger pullback phase. Might actually have started. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that's on the NASDAQ side of things. Yeah, Dow Jones as well. I think this is essentially a V-shaped formation. Okay, but of course right now we're kind of reacting off this previous structure. Obviously that would potentially develop into something like that, right? Okay. German DAX very correctively pulling back. So again, if that's going to be a corrective structure overall, yeah, I think we'll take it there. Okay, the key zone, right? 101.23.6. Okay, so again, this is coming down pretty corrective as a whole. Around this zone here, we do have some areas as well. Okay, So I think generally you don't want to be selling it from where it is, but potentially see if you can get a bounce and following that an upside. Okay, following that upside on it. See nothing there. Okay, okay, this is kind of like taking that and then coming back down, right? So I think this one here has a good possibility of developing something like that. Okay, so potentially this can actually start to make a move lower. Okay, that's on the Aussie side of things. Okay, Switzerland side coming down pretty aggressively. So this here did not really react off that 100%. Then that would open up a slightly different viewpoint, right? So instead of like respecting this channel and start going higher, since this move to the downside is starting to show a little bit more momentum, okay, we can start to flip it, okay, and start to expect some kind of a deeper development over here in overall. Okay, so if that's going to be the case, then potentially wave 3 can come in here, okay, and then wave 5 can potentially retest here, right? So something like that. Okay, and then from there we might get a significant pullback, whether that's like gonna be start moving higher or eventually coming back down. I think that's another day. Okay, okay, so that's on the index side of things. Euro AUD and Euro New Zealand. Okay, this looks pretty corrective to the upside. Yeah, I think there's a chance we might actually make a move lower. Okay, but the only part here you want to be careful is really like this area, right? So yeah, this is definitely corrective in nature. So I think short term you can focus on the sell. If you go down to the lower time frame, right? We do have sufficient confirmation on the lower time frame as well, right? When the market rotates to the downside, the market actually break out that trend line as well. Okay, so the top short term is going to be here. Okay, and you can of course again use some Fibonacci retracement if you can get a corrective pullback. Okay, potentially that's a sell opportunity on the Euro AUD. Okay. I think Euro New Zealand would very much be the same case here, right? Because these two pair very closely correlated. Okay. Yeah, essentially same direction, quite similar in terms of the overall structure as well. Right. So you can get a corrective pullback that will open up a sell opportunity with a target, somewhere back at the bottom. Cool. Good. Okay. So I hope that's clear. Generally that's about it from my end. Okay. Yeah. So I hope that's providing you some different perspective of the market, and all the best. Okay, for this week. Let's see how the market plays out, and then as usual, we'll keep you guys updated. Okay. So that's all for me today. We'll see you guys in the next session. Yeah. Okay. See you guys. Bye bye.